I discovered something a few years ago that changed my life, that many of you will understand. As a kid, I was really fascinated with fantasy stories. I remember knowing the characters and the plot of The Lord of the Rings before I could even read the book, or being able to quote Star Wars movies almost word for word. Superhero cartoons, where I was first introduced to the X-Men, Spider-Man, and Batman, were the highlight of my week. And at the time, these were just fun adventure stories. They were only part of popular culture. My love for these characters and grand fantasy stories carried on into my adolescence with a vengeance. Preteen years are an awkward time for just about anybody. But for a geeky kid like me, they were tough. Like so many others, I retreated to my stories when life got complicated. What was once simply escape through alien worlds or fairy tales now stirred up something deeper in me. It stirred up a longing for something more significant and larger than myself. To have my life be part of some greater story. And this longing reemerged whenever I read the latest science fiction young adult novel or watched the newest movie. There was a great passion for reading books and watching movies, playing games, and imagining with my friends. I learned about life and love and virtue and hope through these stories. Not only was there great fun, but there was also purpose. Living life through the perspective of these grand stories of good and evil, loss and triumph, war and peace. Though I was told these sorts of things, like knights and dragons, spaceships, wizards, and fairy tales, were simply a stage kids went through, I knew there was something else going on. I just couldn't put my pulse on it. And besides, there was another complication. At the same time I grew up loving epic fantasy stories, I also grew up in the Christian faith. I've always loved my faith in Jesus. Worship, discipleship, prayer, Christian education, these have always been central to my life. I had a deep love for Jesus and enjoyed life with my congregation. But there was still a tension going on. On the one hand, I loved great epic stories full of fantasy and wonder. But on the other hand, I felt like these things could not and probably should not coexist with my Christian faith. Our Christian faith revolved around Holy Scripture. Still, the way I saw people using Scripture seemed remarkably different from the way I enjoyed the literature I loved. Yes, there were amazing stories in Scripture, but the way they were presented felt disjointed. It seemed as if the point of each story lay in some morals for living. This person did something good, now they're an example for you. After all, the faith was about the real world, not an imaginary one. Bible verses were memorized and quoted, most often to help remind me of some specific way of living or thinking. And on top of that, in some Christian circles, I saw that fantasy and sci-fi stories were something to be tolerated at best and condemned at worst. Anything that even smelled like wizards, magic, or aliens was right out. To them, our faith was about Jesus and living life the right way, avoiding anything that doesn't focus squarely on the disciplines of the Christian faith. There was no room for reading anything that wasn't directly related to personal discipleship or morality. My dad was a pastor, and he did a fantastic job of raising me in the faith through Scripture and catechesis. My mother, a dedicated and loving Christian school teacher, gave me nothing but positive spiritual support. God used my parents and family to continually bring me God's word and keep me firm in the faith. But still, there was always an internal tension, and I'm guessing that many of you have felt that tension too. On the one hand, I loved my Lord. On the other hand, I was stirred by the idea of superheroes in comics overcoming insane odds and to save the world, or fantasy characters going toe-to-toe against evil monsters. And somehow, I believed that I couldn't love both openly. So my love for stories became something of an embarrassing guilty pleasure. I hid my comics and love for epic stories from view and acted like two people at once. Then I stumbled upon something remarkable. I could have both. For years, I've fumbled through different books and articles about what makes a good story tick. Like, really tick. You know, not merely the formula for a movie screenplay. I'm talking about a timeless and gut-wrenching story that makes us long to be part of something bigger than ourselves. I'm really talking about the epic. To be fair, the word epic has something of a confused modern history. The word used to be used for a small subset of long poems in history with sweeping themes. In modern usage, the term epic has been changed from a noun to an adjective. Think about the difference between the big E epic as a long poem and the little e epic as an adjective. Though the meaning of the word is dulled, the intent is the same. If something is epic, it's sweeping, grand, larger than life, profound, or just plain awesome. Modern epic fantasy as a genre for books, movie, or television is long, written from multiple character viewpoints, and deals with such deep themes as the nature of love, death, and destiny. An epic fail is a screw-up so spectacular it deserves its own respect. It's slang, but it's clear. There is room for the epic in the world around us. At its core, besides the big themes or length, what really makes something epic? Have you ever wondered why fairy tales just won't go away? I'm not talking about Disney, though they keep on putting out both cartoon and live-action fairy tale movies. It's a kind of genre. Stories of faraway lands, galaxies far, far away, events that happened once upon a time. Fantasy and sci-fi genres usually are categorized by their environments. Sci-fi stories tend to focus on environments where scientific ideas are played out. Simply put, these are worlds where space travel is a reality, robots walk alongside us, or we finally mastered the art of genetic engineering. On the flip side, the fantasy genre is categorized by environments where laws of nature are different from ours. Think about worlds filled with dragons, magic, or even the Force. In both these examples, we're presented with worlds that aren't really our own or aren't ours yet. Though packaged differently, these environments are made up of the same stuff, the stuff of fairy tales. You may know that the author J.R.R. Tolkien made the modern epic fantasy genre popular. He wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. You may not know that he was a lifelong Christian. Not only was he enthralled with mythology, legends, and languages, but also the faith. He also wrote about this human pull towards great epic stories. He often dealt head-on with the prejudice that mythology and fairy tales were fine for kids, but not for adults. Sure, elves, fairies, time travel, dragons, and adventures in long-lost civilizations were excellent themes for kids, but for adults, we need to focus on real-world stories, right? Well, to Tolkien, the answer was an emphatic no. In his dazzling essay on fairy stories, he summarized how a great epic story isn't as much about us avoiding real-world problems, it's about awakening in us the desire for real-world solutions. Our culture tells us that this world and all that's in it is all there really is. There's no supernatural, there's only the present. Life is only what you make of it because there's no real story going on behind the scenes. The universe has to abide by specific rules, and people act predictably. Ultimately, the desire brought about by epic stories is that the universe doesn't have to abide by specific rules, and that people don't have to act predictably. We're told that themes like love, death, and the idea of God must fall in line with the world's idea of progress. And what is our world's idea of progress? To always abandon the outdated views of the past and to press on towards new ideas for the future. The more we learn, the more we distance ourselves from barbaric, old-fashioned, or religious stories of the universe. We have this impulse to assume that anything old is uncivilized and every new idea must uncover the truth. Well, honestly, these views are terrifying. Think about it. Some may find it comforting to believe that we're all simply accidents of science, the stardust living and dying and being recycled back into the universe when we die. People with this view believe there is no epic story to humanity, no purpose or plan for anything. But I say, if the only sane, scientific, verifiable way to view reality is that there's no benevolent God or gods, then what are we left with? When it comes down to it, all we're left with is a bleak, godless narrative of the universe. Furthermore, all we have to cling to is progress by building bigger and better machines. But all our progress is futile and foolish. With the vast unknown out there, with our limited resources, if we're all accidents floating around in the void of the universe, I'd say we need some hope. Besides, many sci-fi stories really are all about what happens when the progress we make through machines, science, and technology goes wrong and attacks humanity. Not a hopeful picture of the future. Regardless of what people believe about the universe, it's obvious they desire a change. No matter how progressive people claim to be, ultimately, they seek stories to give them a purpose in this seemingly purposeless universe. So they turn to comic books and fantasy shows. People desire a break from the familiar. The secular, cold, and even scientific view of progress is frankly pretty bleak. People need something epic to cling to. That said, now we're back to Tolkien. He couldn't stand this idea of life. He couldn't stand the thought of progress for progress's sake. Tolkien knew that deep down, we all have a desire for something greater than we have. This isn't found in abandoning the past and pressing on to the future. Neither is it found in looking into our personal stories. Tolkien spent much of his career, a Christian working in the field of literature, and found three things that people long for. The desire for recovery, escape, and consolation were what made a fairy tale story, as he put it, so compelling. I submit that it's these three longings of Tolkien that it so often draws us to our fantasy stories for meaning. The idea of the hero's journey is essential. Still, when combined with these three desires, stories become epic for so many. Let's look at these three different desires and how they point us the epic. Furthermore, let's investigate why Christians need to reclaim the epic. First, let's look to the desire for recovery. This desire for recovery is essentially longing to look at the world through fresh eyes. We get tired of our perspective. Life can get so repetitive, you know? We get up, we go about our routines, go home, and do the same thing the next day. The desire for recovery shifts our viewpoint away from the jaded and cynical to the inquisitive and the humble. Ultimately, it's a desire to be humbled by the big picture. The familiarity and routine can so easily blind our eyes to the world that's around us. The desire for recovery is a desire to take a step back and see the world and things the way they're meant to be. We long for a recovered viewpoint and a recovered world. But there's another desire to consider. It's the desire to escape. When I was a kid, one of the biggest complaints I heard against immersing myself in these kinds of stories was that I was just escaping the world. Come on, Pete, I'd hear. Get in touch with the real world. Don't pretend or make believe. Those stories are just adolescent power fantasies. They're escapist. And I felt guilty for loving epic stories. The world told me they weren't true. But this desire is to escape from the world's idea of progress. After all, life consists of mostly thinking things are okay, then experiencing moments of terror when we realize they're not. But there's so much more in the world that is simply wrong. The desire to escape from the grinding gears of politics, war, bickering, all in the name of progress, is good. Why simply accept all the evils of the world as normal? Why not dream of something new? Epic stories create these worlds for us. Worlds where ordinary people have extraordinary powers. The little guy can stand up to monsters. Though not all good, these escapist worlds provide another option for our imaginations. And combined with the desire for recovery, the desire for escape creates a powerful longing. A longing for a new world, a new creation, a new epic reality. Deep down, we all want that. We desire to escape from brokenness. We turn to all sorts of substances and distractions to numb the pain. These are harmful ways to avoid the brokenness of the present. No matter how hard we try to escape, the world is still broken. In fact, what we usually turn to for escape only adds to the hurt, harm, and brokenness of the world. And we turn inwards and away from others. We neglect our responsibilities, pretend to be something we're not. In epic stories, though, the world doesn't have to stay broken. News doesn't have to be mostly bad, though it still can be. There's an out, and we live vicariously through these stories. They provide a different kind of escape. And that desire is a noble, good, and true desire. Something we reach for, long for, but cannot touch. But we can dream of release from the prison of the familiar. Then there's the third big longing, the longing for consolation. We all love happy endings. We long for consolation for our souls, issues to be resolved, and problems to be made right. In this world, we know it won't usually happen, but we still desire this. And why is this? Why do we really like the good guy to win, the princess to find her prince, the villain to be overthrown? What is it about happy endings that draws us in, makes us suckers, makes us all saps? Like sitting in a movie theater at the end of a big movie scene, and even the tough guys are tearing up. I believe our desire for happy endings has everything to do with what an epic story fights against: this broken world. Our love for good stories taps into the desire not only to escape the brokenness of this world for a time, but to do so forever. People around the world agree that things are not right. Wars, hunger, pain, death, pettiness, disasters. The list could go on. But the desire to escape from the world is not merely to leave it. This, I believe, is a huge misconception about what a good escape story does. Instead, I believe that we know we're meant for this world, but we also desire a day when the brokenness we endure is gone. And this is the happily ever after we crave. Some of the best narratives provide some sort of consolation from brokenness, a dramatic turn where things turn out right in the end. Our expectation amid the brokenness of the world is that things won't always turn out right, but our inward longing is that they will, which leads us to what epic stories actually do. An epic story understands what's going on behind the scenes of reality. It reminds us that there is such a thing as evil, and that it can be defeated. As children, we get this. We love fairy tales, fantasy, adventure, and the like. Children seem to find it easier to call a thing what it is, good and evil. That evil can somehow be defeated, even if we don't know how. That the darkness can be overcome with the light. But as we get older, we're told through progress or let down or the grind of daily life that these distinctions of good and evil, right and wrong, are really subjective. We're tempted by the world to believe that everything is relative. Right and wrong are what you make it, right? Well, epic stories give us an emphatic no. Why? Because they tell us that there are problems in this world we don't simply need to accept. We don't need to see all ethics as shades of gray. In these sorts of stories, we're drawn away from the familiar to see more clearly what we once lost. Something epic uses symbols and metaphors to accentuate what's true. Knights, dragons, spaceships, superheroes all represent big ideas and themes in our lives. This is why adults still sneak away to watch comic book movies or read fantasy books, because these symbols still speak to us. But if the story is really good, then the knight defeats the dragon. The princess gets her crown. Death is overturned, and there's a happy ending. That's what makes it epic. Not in a silly, predictable way. Instead, the epic slaying of the dragon, whatever it is in the story, fulfills our deepest desires surrounding this broken world. The hope that we'll all live happily ever after, and that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves. So what does this all have to do with our Christian faith? For a long time, I struggled with my love for epic stories and my faith. Then one day, in young adulthood, I opened the Bible. Really opened it, not merely to read a favorite verse or to find the moral of a story. I opened the Bible to read it for myself. I took the plunge and started at the beginning. And what I found was something very different than what I thought I'd see or I was taught to believe by Christian pop culture. I didn't find an assortment of morality tales or a simple collection of wisdom. What I found was a long, epic tale, and a fantastic one at that. A story that starts at the beginning of all things and caps off with the end of all things. One filled with any of the grand schemes or plots found in my favorite fantasy stories. Love, death, destiny, failure, redemption, betrayal, giants, an ancient dragon doom bent on mankind's misery. It fulfilled my desires for a renewed perspective on the world, that things aren't always what they seem. It satisfied my desire for escape, that I don't have to believe that everything's okay, and that there really is brokenness and evil in the world. And it fulfilled my desire for consolation, that evil doesn't win in the end, but it is overcome for us by the mighty hero, Jesus Christ. But this story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It was about the faith, my faith, the very core of my faith. It had been under my nose the whole time, but I hadn't seen it. It's an epic story, but it's true. It's the one true story revealed to you and to me through God's word as an account or a narrative. And unlike what I'd been led to believe by so many well-intended storybooks, the main character of the story, the true story of Scripture, is not me. The story of David and Goliath wasn't about me. It was part of a greater story. The Psalms were not only poems for me to memorize, they were the songs of an ancient people yearning for God to fulfill his epic promises to them. I found the main story of Scripture is this promised epic hero, the true king and champion of mankind, who came to battle mankind's enemies for us. The great story of how God, through this champion, reclaimed creation for himself and calls us to take part in the story of salvation. And this story wasn't about me, but it involved me. It included me in ways no other stories I loved so dearly could. God opened my eyes to this epic calling, and I have been made his through Christ. I had been called by him, adopted, or called into his family through his means of grace, transferred from the darkness into the light. I turned from being another person stumbling through life to being brought into the true plan of salvation that God had been working from the beginning of time to bring Christ into the world. That story is still going on and will go on until Christ returns. I'm part of the most epic salvation story, but it's true. And the more I dug into the story, the more I saw the parallels the stories I love to have with the great story of God's reclaiming creation for himself. I dug, uncovering more and more. At the heart of understanding, I found some ancient teachings of the faith that helped me see my place in the epic story even better. My desire is that you too would see the great story of salvation that God has called you to be part of. I have spent much time writing, thinking about, and teaching the faith to people like myself. People who don't want to make the Bible a set of coaching verses, who think there might be a grand narrative behind the scriptures, but are lost in morality plays. People who know there's something bigger going on when learning the faith and reading the scriptures. Christians know there is an ancient evil dragon. Scripture talks about Satan as a dragon. Haunting our nightmares and tempting our faith, he prowls the earth. He is our enemy, and he's been the enemy of mankind since the beginning. But he has been mortally wounded by Christ, the center of reality and the heart of our faith. We don't have to look to a fairy tale to see this. We have it in Scripture. Our longing for greater and higher things reflects the real epic story of the faith going on around us all the time. There's more than meets the eye. The world around us is at war as God is reclaiming his creation. The true king of mankind, Christ, has landed into this reality. He established his reign, his kingdom, here on earth and calls us into it. By his mighty weapons of word and sacrament, he expands his territory. He reclaims hearts for himself, transferring people from being slaves to the darkness to children of God and heirs of God's kingdom, brothers and sisters of Christ, princes and princesses of the King of Kings, living each day in God's epic plan of salvation. God involves us in his mission, passing on the message through us. The message is big and epic, but many Christians have lost the spark. It's time to wake up to the spiritual war waging around us. Engage Scripture, see our calling, and take part in it. It's time to take back the idea of the epic for the faith.